Hey everybody, welcome back to the Right Sports Podcast. I'm Ian Powers, and my guest today is LA Chargers beat writer Dan Popper. He works for The Athletic, covering the Chargers. And Dan, I think Dan is a former colleague of mine. He interned at the Daily News when I was there, and then he became a full-time writer there. And Dan, when I got onto Substack, Dan was already on Substack, and he had started. He had brought some of his community from The Athletic over, or his following there, and he is doing some really interesting things with his community of Charger fans who are obsessed with it,
Yeah,
and
it's a good way to put
and,
it.
and he has realized I'm going to let Dan talk about it more, but this is what I'm preaching to my audience is building once you start to build your community and engage with them, find new ways to engage with them and to then monetize that engagement. And I think Dan Dan is like a rising star on Substack in sports
I appreciate that.
because he's been getting a lot of paid subscribers and he's doing a wonderful job. I think the engagement is incredible in the chats, the threads, everything I see in the videos. And so, but that's why we have Dan on, but let's just talk about Dan. Give me a little, the 90-second bio of your life to this point.
Yeah, so went to the University of Maryland for journalism school. While I was there, interned with MLB.com, and that's how I sort of got my first experience in professional sports environment. After my senior year, I got the internship with the Daily News, as you mentioned. That's where we met for the first time, and obviously was around a bunch of really, really talented people from the copy desk, designers, writers, editors across the board, and worked as hard as I could for that summer and took every single opportunity that no one else wanted, and ended up writing 200 something stories that summer and parlayed that into a full-time gig. And as you know, Ian, it was kind of on and off. It was, worked for 9 months, got laid off, came back, got rehired, was a web editor for a little bit, and just kind of tried to carve my role out as far as, covering sports around New York. Ended up finding my niche with the Jets and more NFL stuff, and got laid off again a second time. And after that, got hired by The Athletic, and I've been there now for 8 years. Got hired to cover the Jaguars, and then in 2019 moved over to the Chargers, and I've been doing that ever since. 90 seconds exactly.
Awesome. That you're good at this. All right. Dan, one of the things I remember is like I was an editor, I was on the desk, but I did a little bit of writing here and there. And one of my things was college basketball. And I remember sitting with you at the ACC tournament at Barclays Center.
Yeah.
We were both covering it. And there was like this moment where you're watching, it's the 1 year Jason Tatum was at Duke.
Yep. I remember it very, very,
and
very
you
clearly.
turned to me and you said, "Oh my gosh, this guy," you said something, he is going to be like so special. He was running the point for Duke. He was doing all these things. And I just remember that conversation. And
I remember it very clearly because I wrote a story about how I thought he was going to be the best player in the draft, and I got a bunch of blowback on it. So I've gone back and reread that story and been like, you know what? My basketball scouting nose was pretty good even at 22 years old.
It was also, I think, that same tournament, like Grayson Allen had one of his episodes. And I remember like you were covering it might've been that same Duke game you were covering. And I had to like, I had to chase down Grayson Allen. And of course he wasn't talking. He gave like a hip check at mid court or something like that.
Yeah.
And, it was that season that he just kept
tripping people. He couldn't stop tripping people. Yeah.
But I remember, we had a lot. The Daily News internship in the sports department was very, I feel like a coveted thing. And, we had some really good people come through there. Some that are still in the industry, some that are not in the industry, have totally nothing to do with the industry, but they're doing great things in
Yeah.
business but you were we knew right away, there was something special with you, I think. And
Yeah.
I
I
think that's why
appreciate that.
we hired you, multiple times
Yeah, right.
afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Uh,
I mean, the opportunities were fantastic. I mean, it just was like the type of environment where, if you were ambitious and you had story ideas and at that point, I was trying to be super creative and come up with stuff for the Sunday section, and you were always open to, hey, if you have a cool idea. I remember I wrote a feature on the millennial athlete that we did a whole spread
yeah,
on the
I
Sunday
remember that.
section. I mean, those opportunities were absolutely enormous, just to like have the support of everybody there and just to be able to be creative and look for enterprise stuff and then have fantastic editors to kind of shepherd me through the process. I mean, that was huge in my development early on in my career.
Yeah, it was great. And then it was great we had, there was we had this reunion, I think, at like Foley's Bar
Yeah.
where all these people from decades of daily news, and you were, I think, in talks to become the Jags writer at that moment at the Athletic. And it was neat to see that quickly. And then quickly you went to LA, or after 1 year.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Charger beat opened up or they created the Charger beat
No, the
or
Charger beat opened up, and then I was doing long distance with my then girlfriend, now wife, and she had always wanted to move to California, and we were trying to figure
okay.
out where we would reconnect, and she wasn't particularly interested in moving to Jacksonville. So once that beat opened up, I was like, yeah. I was like, she basically had like a no trade clause list. She was like, I'll move to Denver, Miami. You can come back to New York. We can go to Philly or California. I was like, all right, we'll make it happen. So when that job opened up, I full court press, was like, I'm super interested. What do I have to do to get it? And actually what happened was, do you remember the AAF, the American Alliance of Football? It was one of those spring leagues that they had going on.
I think so.
And so the league was happening, and I had like embedded with the Atlanta team for a day in the spring. And that was when the league was sort of on the fritz. And so like 4 or 5 days after I was in Atlanta with the team, kind of embedding with the coaches and the players and watching practice, and I was just going to do a story about a player that I connected with that was playing for the team. The league folded 5 days later. So I had all this like inside info. So I ended up writing a big feature about like the, inside the collapse of the AAF. And that was like kind of the story that, happened at the right time. And then they were like, you know what, let's give them a shot in California. And, here we are 7 years later. I've been covering the Chargers since then.
Great, great. And you've are is that so? I'm trying to the timeline of the. Is this your third coach? Because I can't
Yeah.
remember if Vance Joseph. So you had
No, it
one
was
year, or at least
Anthony Lynn.
Anthony Lynn. I'm sorry,
And then he got fired after
yeah,
2020, and then it was Brandon
and then
Staley for
Staley.
3 years, and then Jim Harbaugh now is the third coach and second GM.
Oh wow. So you got a bit of an upheaval, but I mean
Yeah.
Harbaugh is an interesting character to cover in some ways, and some not some ways, I guess.
I mean, as journalists, we're looking for interesting characters. I think that's what's good for business, and Jim Harbaugh is 100% interesting, very unique individual. So always stuff to write about.
So now you're in your seventh season on the beat with the Chargers. You what last season you decided your engagement, you've gotten to know your followers, your
Yeah.
audience over time. What convinced you to you tried it out. You tried to say, hey, where can I bring the chat? Where can I
Yeah. Yeah.
uh and so what was the what was behind that thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think from the moment I got hired by The Athletic and finally had my own beat, because it was kind of when I was at the Daily News, I was covering the Jets, but it wasn't really
Mhm.
mine. Like, I didn't really have the title of Jets beat writer, and I didn't really have control over like doing what I wanted on the beat all the time. And so when I got the Jags job, I really wanted to make it my own. I had a lot of ideas of like how I wanted to do that. But the number one thing that's been a through line through my career as a beat writer is like I want to make it a two-way street. Like I didn't want it to be a situation where I was just giving the fans what I thought they wanted. I wanted to have that back and forth, that communication. I wanted to be there for them to explain things. I wanted to be super interactive, mailbags. And initially, Twitter was a great place to do that. And I loved Twitter. And then, over time, I think it's probably a combination of, ownership of that company. And also just when you grow a bigger following, you inevitably get some negative actors within that following. It just got very toxic, to the
Mhm.
point where like I felt like the two-way street wasn't really productive anymore. And so, you know, when I turned to Substack, I wanted to start my own podcast. I wanted to start doing these live streams regularly through a platform that I felt like, gave me what I wanted. But also I wanted to create a community where we could get back to those early days of Twitter, where it felt like it was really constructive and productive, and you could have these football conversations that were nuanced, and you could have that type of interactive, um, you know, environment, without as much toxicity. And those were sort of the two prongs of my approach. I wanted to, I was doing these live streams on YouTube, but, I wanted a spot where, I could sort of lean into a subscription based model, which Substack provided. And then I also wanted to, find a space where I could pair that live stream podcast with some sort of interactive community based chat, and move, a lot of my, analysis and interaction from Twitter to somewhere where I felt like there was a little bit less toxicity. And I think we've been able to achieve that so far.
I mean, you look at those, even just your week threads, and like your build up threads that you have, and then your game day threads. I mean, you're getting uh thousands of interactions. Now,
Yeah.
obviously that sometimes a handful of people make up a lot of those.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've got engagement, and I mean, it shows you turned that, and then this past summer during training camp, you turned on the paid element. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I
And
think like, yeah, I like, for me, I was always sort of planning to get there, but just in doing my research and talking to people who had started podcasts and even had worked with Substack, I think I needed to get it to a point where, people were addicted to the content. That's probably the best way to do it. Like they were expecting it in the case of training camp, I was doing them daily, during the off season, weekly, during the season, twice a week. There had to be an expectation that like, okay, this is going to be waiting in my Spotify. This is going to be waiting in my Apple Podcast. It's going to be waiting for me on Substack every week. And it takes time to build that up. Like if you try and right off the bat, make something, a paid piece of content, and there's no proof of concept, and people aren't really addicted to it, and they don't really expect it to be there every week, it's hard to ask people to pay for that. But after 9 months of doing it and proving over the course of an NFL calendar what the content schedule was going to look like, and then people had that expectation that it was going to be there, and they saw the value in it, and they realized like, hey, my ability to root for the Chargers is better because I have this. I'm a more educated fan as a result. When I'm around Chargers fans, when I'm in a bar, when I'm having a conversation, like there's information here that I can pull out and use and be the smart fan in the room. And then once you build up that equity and make it a situation where people are addicted to the content, they need it every week, then you can go ahead and introduce a paywall, and you're probably going to have more success because people are like, you know what, for $8 a month, or if you do a year long, it's a little bit less than that. Like, hey, this is worth it for me. Like I'll have one less, latte from the coffee shop, and instead I'll have this as something that I can use as a fan, to enhance my experience wherever that may be. And so that was sort of my thought process, and I think it ended up working out well. But I was, it was throwing stuff against the wall. That's really what it was. It was trial and error, and there was a little bit of apprehension certainly before I introduced the paywall, to be like, have I done enough here? Have I
Mhm.
truly proved the concept to the point where we're going to see the transition where it's people are going to be willing to pay for it? And initially it was like it could be a situation where people don't, and
Mhm.
I've misjudged it. And like that's part of starting the business and doing this whole kind of thing is taking that leap of faith and believing in yourself and believing that you've proved the concept to the point where people are willing to pay for it. But that was sort of the thought process, and it did, thankfully it worked out well. And I think I'll give myself a little bit of credit for putting in the work and creating a product that was ultimately worth paying for a number of people.
Would you be willing to tell me how many paid subscribers you have right now?
Yeah, I think we're
Or
at 660, something like that.
wow,
So
great.
yeah, it's been really, really good. And I tried to enter it with um, you know, reasonable expectations, right? Like if I got 100 people to sign up, that's a win, you know?
Yep.
I had an idea of what I thought it could be when I started it. And when I told that to people, both, you know, colleagues, family members, a lot of people were like, hey, like, you know, make those expectations a little bit more reasonable. And I certainly had that like in the back of my mind, but I believed in myself and I felt like there was enough people out there based on the engagement I get through my athletic work and the rest that I felt like I could get there. So it's been a great start, 100% a great start, and I'm super thankful to all the people that believe in me and are willing to, you know, support me as I go on this journey.
That's awesome. That is a uh I mean, again, you're uh elucidating, or I'm trying, I'm being too writer like here, I guess, with my
Yeah.
word verbiage, but
Yeah.
you're saying, again, like I introduced it, you're doing exactly what I'm trying to preach to my audience is. Now, granted, you've been on the beat now 7 years, so you you built this authenticity with your following, your readership, your audience on Twitter, and you found this, you 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 enjoyed that, that give and take, and you've uh been able to move it to a new platform
Yeah.
at Substack, and it's and you're continuing to build it, where or and build what that engagement does for you and for your audience. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I like, I see, like, one of the things I want to preach is, like, if you have a game chat thread, I mean, your pain points that your audience is giving you is obviously the food for your content
Yeah.
and your other content. You know, it's a that if that's what they're saying, that's what they want to hear. And you have developed that
Exactly.
over several years. And
Exactly.
you're listening to your audience.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to do. It's uh you've obviously, set forth a strong journalism background, but we're in this, how do we become more than just the beat writer? How do we
Yeah. Yeah.
become
Yeah.
um and how do we make it sustainable in the future going forward? It's a different world. We see legacy media is just falling by the wayside, and we are victims of that, because we were the legacy outlet that we both worked at.
Yeah.
Has purged so much staff, and it's bare. Sadly, it's barely hanging on by a thread right now. But
Yeah, I think honestly it's an astute observation because that's one of my principles. I think as a journalist, sports journalist, sports writer, beat writer, like listen to what the fans are talking about to the point where like when we have uh a beat writing handbook that Dan Uthman, one of our editors, put together. Um, I think it was a few months ago. It was like during the off season. And the piece that I wrote for the handbook was like, listen to the fans, like listen to the fans. Cause it's something that I think been able to do successfully in my career. What are they talking about? And lean into what they're talking about, write about it, talk about it. And like, I think with legacy beat writers, there was always this idea that if fans brought up some ridiculous, like, trade proposal or some situation that was outlandish and not possible, that there was like, there was some sort of negative component of like even addressing that. Like you were stooping down to the fan level as a writer if you took this trade idea and even like acknowledged it. I took a different approach, which is if all of the fans are talking about this one possible, trade proposal, and it's not possible because of finances, because of organizational philosophy, like that information is valuable. That that it's impossible is valuable. Not everyone is going to have that information because you're the expert in your topic. And so
Mhm.
taking that idea, that trade proposal, and being like, hey, this is why this is impossible. It's impossible because financially it doesn't work with the cap. It's impossible because from an organizational philosophy perspective, they would never make this trade. They would never give up this amount of draft capital, et cetera, et cetera. Writing a
Mhm.
story that takes what the fans are talking about and explaining why it is or is not possible, those stories do very well because you are explaining to the audience, you know, what is going to happen on a topic that they're really interested in. So I've
Mhm.
always, whether it was writing or now podcasting, like if fans are talking about something, you should be talking about it. And if you're not talking about it, you're not doing the job in a modern way, in my opinion.
That's great. Great insight, Dan. So you said about uh the it's I mean but it does, you know, for a creator just starting out
Yeah.
or a journal like I mean, again, you put in 7 years of this beat. So
Yeah.
uh you've built the trust over time, you've the authenticity, and that, it's a I have I have some clients who have asked, like, where I've audited their content,
Hmm.
and some of them are just starting out and they want to cover uh a soccer team or they want to do content, and it's a competitive landscape.
Oh yeah.
And I say, you've got to put in the time, you got to be consistent, and following maybe some of the philosophy of what Dan is just saying is like, where are what is your audience talking about, and hitting those pain points that your audience has, uh, and using that for content, and then doing this consistently. And as you build, like, it took Dan 7 years, and when Dan turned
Yeah.
this on, he got a bunch of free subscribers, and he's got 660 paid subscribers uh, to his audience that are consuming his content and his thoughts and engaging with him,
Yeah.
and they have followed him to this platform. So
Yeah.
uh, it's a proof of concept
Yeah,
in
and
all.
there's no shortcut.
No.
That's the point, I think, is like, like 7 years in the Chargers beat, but you can even go back to, all the lessons I learned on the Jets beat when I
Mhm.
was with the Daily News. Like, you're talking about over a decade of experience of trial and error to build up the equity, and there is no shortcut. Like, it's just hard work every day, over and over and over and over again, to get to a point where you've built up the equity where people are going to, want to consume all of your content. And like, it doesn't happen overnight. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. Like, and you have to put in the work every day, and there's going to be failures, and there's going to be stories that you think are great, or podcasts, or whatever content that you think is amazing that's no one's going to watch or listen to or read. And, I think the most important thing in those situations is to take that as a data point and say, okay, how do I iterate on this to make it better? How do I make this into something that people are going to read, and take every opportunity as a lesson learned? And then just, it's cliche, but you got to stack days to build up the equity. And there's no shortcut to that.
Yeah. You gotta show up, and then perform,
Yeah.
and consistently. And it's once you put those things together, especially in this, uh, you're in a very competitive sphere. I mean, you're covering a team in the second biggest market, in the largest, uh, or the most popular sport in this country, and one of the most popular leagues in the world.
Yeah.
I think they're established. Just, I mean, the fact that they played at a game at the Real Madrid's,
Yeah. At the
Bernabeu,
Bernabeu. Yeah.
and they reconfigured that stadium so that they could have NFL games.
Yeah.
And they're built. Uh, it's a hugely competitive landscape. It is, and if you stay consistent, keep your voice, do that, you will put yourself in a position like you have, where in a year plus you've gone from you turned on this uh new platform, and I don't know if I would describe it as exploded, but your audience has definitely flowed into it. It's
Yeah, 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 and like, but it wasn't really overnight either. Like, I go
Mhm.
back to, it's pretty much been a year. Like, my first Substack live stream was right around Thanksgiving of last year, and so, but it was 9 months of doing it for free, like, getting no monetary, no monetary, gift at all whatsoever for 9 months, and believing that like if you put the time in and you do it over the course of this entire time, that like when you do start asking for it and you put the paywall down, that you've proven capable. But like I go back to, I was doing these live streams on YouTube,
Hmm.
4 years ago, 5 years ago, where like the idea for Hops with Pops started. So like you can say it's been a year, but it's probably been 4 or 5 years of like, doing live streams on YouTube and seeing what worked and like kind of starting to create the brand. And then you can even go back to, okay, it's been 7 years on the beat of building this brand on Twitter and through the Athletic to become like a reputable source of information. And then you can even go back 10 years, right? To like when I first started, at the Daily News and like starting to learn like what it was to be a journalist and how I wanted to do the job. And so, you know, it to go back to your point, it just it takes time. And consistency is key.
Yeah. It's and you hit on something there too. Like it's about like you are your brand. It's
Yeah.
and how you treat your brand is how it works. And your brand, like the Athletic has hired your brand to produce content for it. And then how your brand was on Twitter and you gained a following with Twitter. Like it's and how you cultivate that and treat it. And it's and how seriously you take that. It's some things like I wish personally, I wish like I had back in, I'm like a first million user of Twitter or something like that. And
Yeah.
I wish I had done more with it back then. And I wish I had done more. Like the Daily News had this whole, um, we wanted to get every member of the staff to get a blue check mark on Twitter. And even if you were just an editor like me that didn't have a big following. And so I got my blue check. And I mean, I'm not sad that I lost my blue check when the whole verification thing came
Yeah.
out, but or you had to get a subscription. But um it's I wish I had done more then. I might have been able to take off a little bit more now.
Yeah.
But uh and but I'm realizing that, and so part of the thing is I'm learning in real time and trying to teach people at the same time as that. I could tell you, I could probably help you with your written content so much more than some of the other creator elements that are out there, but I'm using all of that together and trying to be authentic and
Yeah.
trying to find voices like yours to show examples.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, ultimately, like find a way to differentiate yourself. That
Hmm.
to me is like so important. Like why ask yourself the question, why are people going to come to you? Because as you mentioned, it's a competitive landscape, it's a flooded landscape. There is so much content out there and a lot of it is free. So if you're trying to make money off of your content, it has to be different in at least one way and hopefully in a number of different ways. So, for me, what differentiated me? Well, like I have um like taught myself a lot of football. Like I've spent a lot of time watching film, talking to players, talking to coaches, talking to sources, and getting myself to a point where I can watch film and I can break it down at a pretty high level. And like that was not an accident. That's like every free moment I have during the season, during the off season, I'm watching film, I'm quizzing myself on coverages. I'm learning like how to look at an all 22 picture and figure out what defense they're in, what the offense is trying to do, what the route combination is. And what and then also I've gotten, very good using advanced statistics and then pairing the
Yeah.
advanced statistics with the film and putting together like a composite picture of what's happening with the football team. And, that was my niche. That's what I found worked. I found that there was an appetite for that among Chargers fans. They weren't being serviced in that way. And there was enough people out there that really wanted to understand the nuance of the game, the inside scoops of the game, the X's and O's of the game. And, as a result, was able to build this brand of, if you want to know what's actually happening, this is the guy that you have to go to for the Chargers. So whatever you're trying to get into, it doesn't even have to be sports. If you're trying to create content, the first question you should be asking yourself is, how do I differentiate myself? And how do I create content that people can't get anywhere else? And there's a number of different ways to get there. You just have to figure out what your best traits are and lean into those traits and then do the work, day after day to put yourself in a position where you can then produce the content that fits into that mold.
That's awesome. That's Great advice, Dan. And I didn't even have to ask you, hey, can you tell my listener or my audience what you have you've came in with the mindset to just to uh, excuse me, transfer or excuse me, transition to that in your everything you've given. Thank you so much. I
Yeah,
haven't
yeah,
had
of
to.
course. I think about it a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
the reality is, like, in order to do it, you have to think about it a lot, you know, and like I like to think that I'm a process driven individual. So, you know, I'm constantly analyzing my process and trying to figure out why stuff works, why stuff doesn't work. And, you know, thinking about how to improve the process. And so in order to improve the process, you have to figure out, okay, what are the things that are working? Why are they working? And so like when I've gone through that process of trying to figure out what's working and why it's working, what I come back to is like, okay, I've been able to, the stuff that works is the differentiated stuff, the stuff that people can't get anywhere else. And so, you know, figure out what that stuff is and continue to produce content in that vein and be different all the time. And, you know, when you're consistently different, you become a product that like people have to go to. You have to become, you know, the authority in whatever you think you're good at.
All right. Well, Dan, thanks so much for your time. It's Dan hosts on Substack. It's Hops with Pop,
Yep.
and it is a rising star in the sports and football sphere on Substack in genres on Substack. He it is a very energetic uh group that Dan's community. And if you're interested in the NFL, if you're interested, obviously, if you're interested in the Chargers,
Yeah.
it is a must place to be.
Yeah.
But even if you're just, like your team's playing the Chargers next week, or it's such a universal. The NFL is universal.
Yeah.
It's we all know something about all 32 teams, and Dan is. If you are an aspiring creator, I would go into Dan's sphere a little bit and see what he's doing and see what he's talking about in this interview, and experience it for yourself, and you'll get even a better idea. Again, Dan, thanks so much for your time. I know it's a busy time. You had your bye week last week, and I'm so glad you took your time to join me for a good half hour here.
Yeah, this was awesome. And any aspiring creators out there, if you're trying to get into the business, like my DMs are open on Substack, my DMs are open on Twitter. I'm like more than happy to help out. Like, you know, Ian's a really good example of somebody that was there for me when I was young and gave me opportunities and helped me become a better writer. Like that's a beautiful part of this business that I think gets overlooked sometimes. Like there are really good people in this business. There are great people who try to be mentors and help young writers. And like I had a lot of those people in my life when I was young, and I want to be that for young writers and young creators. That's why I wanted to come on and do this episode with you. And so reach out, email me, DM me on Substack, DM me on Twitter if you have questions. Like I'm here and available to help any young creators to try and start their business out.
I will have links to Dan's Substack, his socials, and his content on the Athletic, in underneath our podcast here, so you can find him there. And Dan, again, thanks again, and good luck. And it's interesting to see what the Chargers do coming off the bye.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ian.
All right, take care, Dan.